I'm Dani, that witch next door, and you're listening to That Witch Podcast. Well, hello, my wonderful neighbor. Welcome to an extra special episode of That Witch Podcast. If you don't already know me, hi, I'm Dani, and I'm That Witch Next Door. And today I'll be your host and your guide into all things magic, witchcraft, astrology, and witchy business, of course. And I have a very exciting guest here to introduce to all of you today. Someone that is a frequent listener of the show, and I'm so excited that she reached out to me because I think that we are bringing will be a very fun and enlightening, but hopefully just really also inspiring and informative episode as well for all of you. So today I am joined by Joni Millard. And Joni, would you go ahead and say hello to everyone for me?
Hi, guys.
I'm so glad that you're here. We just did Joni's big three right before the show opened. Do you want to share your big three with everybody?
Yes. Okay. I hope I get this right. So I'm a Cancer sun, a Capricorn moon, and a Libra rising.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
perfect.
yes. You have lots of cardinal energy. So it makes a lot of sense why you reached out to me and how we were talking right before the show. And you were like, I figured I'm going to reach out. And the worst that people can say is, no, that's a very cardinal sign thing to do where you're initiating, you're generating. You're like, you know what? I'm going to at least take my shot. That's exactly the role of the cardinal signs. Is that something that you've kind of been that way most of your life?
No, like I feel like I've had that part of me, but it wasn't until recently, honestly, till I started listening to your podcast that I'm like, I feel like I've carried this part of me and I'm not scared of rejection anymore. I think without having gone through what I've gone through, my natural characteristic is to care less about rejection. And so I'm just ready to leave that part behind me and just move forward. And if somebody says no, they say no. Like it's no harm, no foul.
I love that because we do totally grow into our chart. There are parts that we're born with that feel very natural to us. But a lot of parts of our chart we learn and grow into. And so, for example, my Leo rising, Leo is very, very associated with being kind of a showstopper, standing in the limelight, standing in the spotlight, not giving a shit about, they're bold. They'll just stand out into the light and shine. And that was not my experience at all. And I still very, very, very much struggle with being in the spotlight. It's very much a lesson for me in this life. So that makes a lot of sense to me that there are parts that have been in you and also you've grown into as well. I love that. Well, Joni, I would love for you to introduce yourself a little more officially to let everybody know who you are in your background and why you reached out to be on the show today.
Okay. So I'm 32 years old. I live in Oregon, but I was born in Montana. And I was born about an hour, I think, east of the reservation that I grew up on for the first 7 years of my life. So I'm half Native American and I'm half white. And I still feel funny like saying white because I don't mean that as a bad thing, but I feel like I feel like some people could take that like offensively, but I don't. I embrace that side. I don't know much about it, but I definitely embrace that side. But my mother is full Native American. My dad was white and lived on the reservation for 7 years, almost for the first 7 years of my life. And basically, my parents seen that there was no hope living where we lived. Reservation system, if anybody knows about it, I feel like more and more the truth about reservation systems, how they got started, and the truth about them now is coming to light. And my parents seen that in the 90s, alcoholism had been a problem. But in the late 90s, drugs were really heavily coming in. So, and I have 2 older sisters, and there was just so much. There was no opportunities for jobs. There's no opportunities for schooling. And it's just a reservation in the middle of nowhere with not a lot accessible to you. So my dad's from Oregon, so he moved us out here. And I've basically been living here ever since. We do frequently go back. We used to go back home a lot more. I still call the reservation home just because it's where my most formative years were.
Mm-hmm.
And so we still go back. We're actually going back this summer, and my children are going to be given their Native American names this summer. So we're pretty excited about that happening. But since living in Oregon, we didn't have a large, the closest reservation's like 40 miles away from where I lived at that time. And it's not that there's anything wrong with this, but it wasn't our tribe. It's a 1,000-mile difference between Warm Springs tribes and between the Assiniboine tribes that I'm from. So, yes, we're Indigenous, but they weren't my family, and so we missed our family. But needless to say, we didn't have a lot of that connection, other than what my mom carried. And we are such a matriarchal society. I'm so grateful that my mother has taught us what she's taught us and carried what she could. But that being said, my dad was very religious. And we went to a Christian church for years. And then we kind of veered away from that. He's very wanderlusty. I don't know if that's a word. Trying to find himself. And we eventually went to a temple. He made friends at a Christian church who were going to both Christian church and were Jewish. And there was a temple. So we eventually explored that religion, which was really cool to see those kind of how they mirror each other and how they don't. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a baptized Catholic. So,
wow.
Yeah, I've got a very, very eclectic. That's my favorite word right now. Very eclectic, spiritual, cultural, religious background, but always fallen back onto my Native American roots. Mm-hmm. And they've just been more accessible to me. They've been the most consistent in my life. And I feel like I reached out to you because listening to your podcasts, you were talking about smudging, or you were talking about mirror magic. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is all so familiar. Like, I have to reach out, and I just want to talk to somebody about this. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I've always been kind of witchy, like we even kind of joke about it in our family, but I'm like, no, like I like to walk barefoot outside, not just because I'm lazy and don't want to put my shoes on. I love connecting to the earth. I'm mm-hmm. so much of it. And not even that, like I watched, I think his name's Peter. He's a vlogger, and he records different cultures, and he did it in the Jewish community in Brooklyn. And the stuff that they do, like they hang these little wooden things over their doors for protection. Mm-hmm. I'm like, we do that with Sweetgrass. Like, it's so crazy to me how many of these things like they like mirror each other. I don't know how else to say it other than they mirror each other. But that's kind of my backstory, where I come from. And basically what led me to you was I heard about you through Too Scary Didn't Watch. It's another podcast. So listen to a lot of podcasts. I can't sit down and read, and I can't sit down and watch TV because I'm a stay-at-home mom. But they talked about you, and I was just like, oh, I'll look her up. And then ever since then, I've been hooked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's also familiar.
That's so cool. And really cool that I've heard of that podcast. I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. You've been exposed to a lot then. You've been exposed to a lot. And that in and of itself, Joni, is what I find really intriguing and very unique about you, because most of us come from a more specific background and limited exposure. Even if that wasn't the intention of our caregivers, that's kind of just how things have happened, I think, a lot where, you know, a lot of people kind of sink into their spirituality or their culture, their belief systems, and they stay within that. And we, you know, we're learning. I think that the internet hopefully is helping with this exposure thing. Sometimes I'm sure it's more of a curse than a blessing, but I hope that things like the internet and social media and podcasts and stuff are helping turn and fuel our curious gears so that we're making a choice to step outside of our comfort zone and learn. But very rarely, at least when you look at the majority, very rarely is somebody exposed to as many different belief systems that you've been exposed to. Maybe one or two, but to full blown be raised on the reservation in your indigenous spiritual practices and beliefs, then fully experience the Christian church as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on top of that, the Jewish religion and learning and going to temple and learning. It's just so incredibly fascinating to me. And I think that it's exactly what we need to be able to start having these important conversations that land on many different ears. Because a lot of times when we come from one specific place, it's very, very hard for us to, if we don't also come from that place, it's really hard for us to connect with that empathetically and really truly step into someone's experience, step into their perspective and listen to them. But you are this beautiful bridge of many worlds. And I think it's given you a very, very, what's probably a very divine purpose in this life, I would imagine. And I won't go diving into your chart on the show, though I want to very badly. What I first want to ask you is, when it comes to being raised on the reservation, first, let's start there. I know my demographic that listens to this show. And I know that not that many people probably do have an understanding for reservation life. Would you mind telling us a little bit about it and your memories and how you were raised and what spirituality looked like in day-to-day life?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So basically, to sum it up, I came from a big family. My mom has 5 siblings, and then they all have several children. So you're basically raised, your friends are your cousins, is how that works. And a long time ago, even before the reservation system, when children were born, their parents were hunters and gatherers. Their grandparents were the ones who raised them. And that has even carried over into my generation. My grandmother did a lot of raising of myself and my sisters. And I remember like my mother taught us this too, but I have these memories at my grandmother's house. We raise our plates when we eat. You just lift it up. It's like a prayer that just is saying thank you. You're not just saying thank you to the spirit or the creator. You're also saying thank you to your ancestors, and you're also thanking the person that provided those for you, because without all of these spirits, you wouldn't have the food in front of you. So it's just something little. My children do it as well. We sit down, and even my husband's done it for years. Like, it's just it's such what do you call that? Not second sense. But anyways, he sits down, he lifts his plate, and then we eat. So there's those kind of things. Powwows, there wasn't just powwows in the summertime. We have a big one that goes on during the summer. And then there's also we have one called Midwinter Fair, where there's also a powwow that happens there. And so we wear dance regalia, and there's different types. And I remember stories about we wear ones called jingle dresses. Certain there's different categories, and one of them is a jingle dress category. And there's memories, my sister talking about my uncle sitting at the table, and to make the jingles, you use Copenhagen can lids. So
wow.
yeah, and what's cool about that is we use tobacco to pray, and Copenhagen is tobacco. So we use the lids as the jingles on the dresses. And there's a story behind the jingle dress, which didn't really come to light till recently, but I don't remember it. I'll forward it to you to an email if you're interested in that. But it like just recently came to light, the story of the jingle dress. You know, there was always cigarettes everywhere, not just because people smoke, which I do have a lot of chain smokers in my family, but there was always tobacco. There's always tobacco, coffee, sage, and sweetgrass, and sometimes cedar. And just seeing that kind of stuff, you know, like our miniature apothecaries, you know, and it wasn't like anything special to us. It was just a part of our normal. I mean, it is special, but it was just a part of our normal everyday life to see those things. Right now, I've got a braid of sweetgrass on my dash of my car. I'm like, this probably looks funky, like to people who don't know what it is, but it's just basically protection, especially in a vehicle. So that's kind of the daily stuff. Every time, we're always eating. Like, I feel like that's a staple in a lot of cultures. No matter what, or families.
Yeah,
and
food magic.
Yeah, any reason to eat. Like everybody talks up fried bread. They're like, oh, you know how when that you tell them you're Native American, you know how to make fried bread? And it's like, yeah, but like I know how to make wheat bread better. Like, not wheat bread isn't talked about because it's not served at powwows. It's not like a novelty. It was a staple that came from, much like fry bread, we were given commodities, and they still get commodities on the reservation today. And you got your powdered milk and your flour and your baking soda, and you're like, I guess I'm gonna have to make bread out of this, and you can make it like really good. But it's just that kind of stuff. Seeing certain kinds of, these were just our basics, but it's not something everybody knows about. You move from being so entwined in this world from birth to almost 7 years old, and then you move to a completely urban area, and my friends' parents don't have sweetgrass on their dashboard. It's like, so that was weird for me to see these. It was like pieces were missing.
That makes a lot of sense. I have a follow-up question, but I want to ask a quick question first, especially for our listeners. Will you tell us what a powwow is for anybody that doesn't know? I think that this is this is exactly why I wanted to have you on the show. Okay. There are so many terms that we hear, and we don't take that extra step to learn what that actually is. And I think that helps a lot because, for example, when we talk about sage together later on and smudging and the terminology and the use and everything, I think part of why so much exploitation and appropriation does get continued, and especially really mindlessly continued, is because we just kind of hear these buzz terms and we don't understand the weight of them. We can't put a picture to it. And so we hear like Native American ceremony. Yeah. And I would love it if you would actually take us in depth a little bit what a powwow is and the sacredness behind that.
So it's like a fun ceremony. And anybody and everybody's welcome. And there's even a point during the powwow where anybody can go out and dance. It's called intertribal is the name of that time that anybody can go and do that. But basically what a powwow is it's a gathering. And normally it's in a circle. So like where I'm from, there's an arbor. It's a big covered area. That's where all the dancing happens. And then around that is where you can watch. And then around that are vendors where you could go buy like fry bread or beads or snow cones or, whatever. And then outside of that are the camps, and it's all in a circle. There's a lot of circle representation in the culture.
That resonates with so much of my spirituality and beliefs. So that's really cool to hear.
What do you call that? Cyclical? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, cyclical is what I say. Yeah, but circles and cycles and circular in general, yeah, that's something the deeper I go into my own spirituality, especially through astrology and the cosmos and like universal spirituality, if you will, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
It is, yeah. And so basically everything's done in a circle. There's dancing. There are giveaways. We recognize our veterans. That's a big deal. So there's an eagle staff that's carried. It's a big staff that has a bunch of eagle feathers on it. And there's other stuff on it as well. And I don't know the history behind it, but normally it's a veteran that carries it in when you first start the powwow. And normally at the beginning and the ending of every day, there is something called the dance. The main dance where everybody comes in is called grand entry. So let's say there's a weekend dedicated to a powwow. It's normally 3 days. The first dance of the day is grand entry. And the first person to lead grand entry in is normally the veteran carrying the eagle staff. I haven't been to a powwow where it hasn't been a veteran. I'm sure there could be an exception, but normally that's who it is. It's normally an elder who does that. And so they lead everybody in, and basically there's an order that the dancers go in. Normally the eldest go in first and the youngest are last. A lot of stuff is done that way. And then they go by category. And then once that dance is over, that's when they normally have intertribal. And that's when they invite everybody from all backgrounds to come in. And you don't have to dance. Like the drum is going and you can just go and you can walk in a circle. You can talk. You can dance. You can not talk. It can be, you don't have to wear regalia. You don't have to be Native American. You know, it's bridging that gap between natives and non-natives, because we want you to come in and we want you to learn. We want you to be a part of it. We want you to experience what we experience. And so basically it's dancing for 3 days. There's rotations of different categories that go. They compete, and normally in those competitions, it's in remembrance of an elder or a veteran, or like somebody lost to illness or something. A lot of times that's what those giveaways are for, or they'll recognize a significant elder who had passed away. There's a lot that go on. And then sometimes and anybody can watch this. Anybody's welcome into the powwow. There's no drugs or alcohol allowed. But anybody can come and watch this. And a lot of times at the camps so like my clan name is Bad Moccasin Clan. I really wanted to name my business after that, but I'm like, that's a family name. Like I can't do that. So like at our camp, the Bad Moccasin Camp, that's where I was named the first time I was given my Indian name. And my sister was named there. And then this summer, that's where my children will be named. So we'll have our own like family ceremonies done at our own camps. And normally you invite people, and there's always so much food. You always feed people. And so that's basically it. It's just like, it's like a big family reunion with dancing, where all the clans used to gather. And I don't know the history behind it.
So this is not necessarily tribe specific. This is this is a large gathering with multiple groups of natives.
Yeah. So normally, like my reservation that I'm from, there are 2 tribes associated with that reservation. They're Assiniboine and Gros-Ventre, or also known as Nakota and White Clay. And so those are 2 tribes specific to that area. But that doesn't mean that it's only those tribes that celebrate.
Okay. Very, very cool. This is already just so enlightening. I'm so excited to be asking you all this. Now, the follow-up question I was going to ask you is about that transition from being raised on the reservation, surrounded by your native family, and then moving to Oregon and joining a Christian church, being around completely different culture at that point. What do you remember about that transition? What was challenging? What was exciting? Any of it?
Um, so one thing that stuck out to me for sure, and it's not that anybody ever said anything to me, but um, they definitely, it was a smaller town that we moved to, definitely really conservative,
Okay.
and not a lot of people of color. Just, I think we were one of two, possibly two Native American families in that town. And so I feel like um, I was definitely talked to a little bit different, not necessarily treated bad. That kind of came later on. People like to blame certain behaviors because of my skin color, and it's like, no, that's not it. But I digress. So that, and I missed my family because of how much I was around my family. I just knew. I knew something was missing from the time I was 7 years old. Something wasn't, that part of my life was missing because it was so different. Like I said, we wouldn't see.
Would you go back and visit?
Yeah, we would go back for sure every summer because that's when that powwow would happen. We would go back during, I think, Christmas. There was a couple of Christmases we went back, but probably 2 or 3 times a year. And my parents didn't. They were raising 3 kids on one income a lot of the time, so it's expensive to travel that far. And sometimes I think my mom just saved and saved and saved so that she could take us back to be close to our family, to get that experience so that we weren't detached. And then as far as exciting stuff goes, like, it was exciting to like be in a bigger town, which the town I was in, I think now they have like 10,000 people, but at the time it was only maybe like 5. But to me, from the reservation to that, like, that's the city. So huge, that kind of stuff was pretty exciting.
So what was it like when you started becoming like a teenager and a young adult? And you were now able, once you get to that age, you're able to start really comparing these parts of your childhood. What was that like did you go through a period of anger or resentment toward any part of your lineage at all?
That age is so angsty as it is, and then you bring and then you bring into being so different. Well, I'm not only clearly look different. I'm tall. I'm almost 6 feet tall.
So you're taller than the average female your age on top of that.
Yes, I was at least 5'10" when I was 14.
Wow.
Awkward. Actually had a fall. So that age is tough. Like we just talked about, that age is tough as it is, and had a falling out with one of my friends. And basically everything bad that happened wasn't my fault. And it turned into this whole big drama. And the mom came over to my house and came in the front door and basically bitched out my mom and brought up how, and I don't know how this doesn't have anything to do with what had happened, but brought up how we get to go to college for free. Just brought up my culture into what had this incident that had happened. And basically, and everybody thought that I was the bad influence on my former friend because of where I came from, which I had left when I was 7. I had frequented going back home, and it wasn't that at all. But then like people would bring up how much we get stuff for free, especially college. And that was used against me against my mom during that conversation. And I don't know why. That had nothing to do with the whole drama that had happened. So that was always brought up. And then people like, you get into high school and people are like, oh, you got any peyote? And it's like, what's peyote? I know what a peyote stitch is, but I don't know what you mean. Like, they're like, peyote, will you smoke it? I'm like, I don't know what that is. Because my culture doesn't use it. Or I heard you guys get free food. Like, can you use your tribal ID to get free food? It's like, So there was the stereotypes, but then people
Yep.
were interested, but then you're kind of felt like they kind of make you feel like a novelty, but then you're kind of insulted at how little they know. So it's weird. Such a weird time.
I hope that this is already just right off the bat and as enlightening for people listening as it already is for me, just because it's, first of all, just the few thoughts coming to me right off the bat. First of all, when you're telling that story about the mom coming over to your house, that in and of itself is why it is so important, why I believe it's like many, many, many people's soul mission to talk about healing our generational trauma and our generational wounds, because that woman saying those things, she probably didn't even know where that was coming from. This is what happens when, and I'm going to get really blunt here with everybody, and I'm going to dig at my own lineage here a little bit as well. This is why it's so important to accept what your own bloodline and family members and lineage has done to other groups of people. Even if you are not the person who physically took a hand to that person, to that group of people, it imprints generation after generation after generation. And when we don't talk about it, and we shove it deep down in ourselves and we try and make it go away that way, it doesn't ever go away. It's the exact same thing as a physical wound. And even if that physical wound, quote unquote, heals, what does it look like when it heals? Usually it goes through some horrible infection period. And if it is able to heal, we are left with some protruding, like you can't get away from it scar. Like it is an undeniable scar. And you can pretend all you want that you're healed from it, but that scar is there. And this is what happens, that analogy to me, this is what happens when we compound generational trauma by ignoring it and totally and completely bypassing it. We end up continuing it, usually without intending to. That woman, I don't believe, set out to specifically damage a family of natives that day, for example. But I think that because of her lineage and background, because y'all, if you're living, especially in this country, if you're living in North America, if you're living in the United States, your lineage touches this somewhere. Your lineage either touches the oppressed or touches the oppressors, but we're connected to it somehow. And the further we try to disconnect from that and ignore that and bypass that, in my opinion, that is exactly what compounds and makes this continue happening over and over again. The other thing that kept coming up for me is, as a white person, how I was educated in this country about Indigenous people, which was lumped into this giant category. And it makes so much sense why when you were in high school, for example, and these idiot teenagers, and by the way, all teenagers are idiots, so I'm just going to put that out there. I was an idiot. Yeah, see, we're all idiots when we're teenagers, don't get me wrong. But you know, I remember, so I live in Colorado, and learning about Native Americans was a relatively large part of my education, and only in elementary school. I want to just put that out there. I don't remember learning about anything after that. I remember learning about like American history and world history, but I don't remember after elementary school ever coming back to any kind of Native American history at all. And I really firmly believe part of the reason I only learned the extent that I did is because of I remember specifically learning about some of the tribes that we had here in Colorado. That's
Mhm.
it. And it was
Yeah.
always very fluffy, sunshine and rainbows. Learn about this group of people. Here are some of the things that they would do. That's how they always taught it too in the past tense. These are what Native Americans would do. This is where they would live. And there
Mhm.
was never, ever, ever any current education at all. There's never any education about current events. And where Indigenous people live now, how that history has carried over into modern day. And so now this leads me to my next question for you. Now you get past the angsty teenager,
Mhm.
and now you're in your 20s. And from an archetype standpoint, our 20s, as far as, the archetype of the journey, the story goes, when you get into your 20s, you start letting go of some of the excessive angstiness, the excessive anger
Mhm.
from your teenage years, right? You're able to start putting things into context, having proportionate reactions and perspective to everything. Once you got into your 20s, Joni, how did your eclectic background start settling in for you? Did you have any periods of time in your life where you felt pulled or divided within yourself between your own lineages? Or did it always, were there parts where it was divided? Were there parts where it all felt like it was connected and supposed to be together? What was that like for you?
I always felt like I walk two worlds, I guess is the best way to answer that, because I have these I was raised in my most formative years as traditionally as my mother could. And then you try to carry that with you, but at the same time living in a world where there isn't that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Especially I moved out at 19.
Okay.
I met my husband when I was 18. We started living together at 19. Started going to community college. And like would do stuff. And I went to college in Bend, Oregon, so it's very progressive, very granola. It's a really cool place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's growing super fast. But like remember taking like a yoga class and being so like open. I don't know how else to explain that. Just open to like when you say namaste, the divine in you recognizes the divine, or the divine in me recognizes the divine in you.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking back to like how all that stuff was so bad when I was younger, like we're not going to turn over that rock. It's not of God, right? Or of the God that the church that I grew up in
Mm-hmm.
thought. And so I never felt conflicted. I hope I'm saying this right. I never felt divided. I always felt like I could hold on to my Native American spirituality because it's connected to all,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
It definitely does.
Okay.
It makes a lot of
Because I'm
sense to
like
me.
divided. I never felt like I had to choose between believing
Okay.
in a Christian, Jewish, Catholic God and a Native American God. Somewhere along the way, I had a conversation with my sister, and she's like, we all believe in a spirit. We all believe, we just got different names. There's something, someone, man, woman, whatever you think it is, whatever it is to you,
Mm-hmm.
we all believe in that. This is just her staying open-minded. And so that I never really felt conflicted, like I had to leave any of those behind. If that
I
makes
love
sense.
that. It makes perfect sense to
Okay.
me. It's when I started studying astrology, especially through a historical lens
Mm-hmm.
specifically, when I really wanted to learn about ancient societies utilizing astrology and what that looked like for them. This is what I'm talking about when I say the further and further I go, digging and peeling back the years, peeling back the layers of culture after culture, time period after time period. It could be on this side of the world, it could be on the opposite side of the world. I still find the same basic principles over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this is what validates or affirms. There's a million words for it: collective unconscious, source, spirit, God, the universe, that we're all one, that we're all connected. We come from the same place. We go back to the same place. Archetypal education in general is what gets me there. Because when you learn, so my husband is very indigenous in his background, but I definitely don't want to speak for him by any means, but was not raised in any way related to it at all. Was very much more raised under the white part of his lineage and culture. And he has been reconnecting with his indigenous lineage more and more and more over the last few years. We did, we were one of everybody who did the DNA test.
Oh, okay.
And he discovered, like, holy cow, this is like so much more than I ever thought. This is so much more present in my bloodline and my ancestry, like more recent than I ever realized. And this is really, really common for people that come from mixed backgrounds, because so much of our time in our history, you did not have the safety to practice any other culture outside of Christian white culture. So it makes a lot of sense why a lot of parents, grandparents, caregivers didn't teach their own culture and beliefs and traditions out of fear of their own children's safety, quite honestly. So this is really, really common. But he has been reconnecting a lot more, and when he shares these different stories with me, I can connect it to all of these other cultures that I've learned about that have a similar story from thousands of years ago or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes so much sense to me what you're saying, because just on my own individual research journey, time and time again, all that pops up for me is this is all connected. We have to look at it in different ways because we are also different. Our environment does impact us. Of course, it's going to shape us very, very differently. But there is this undeniable connection in all of us. You could even just, if you wanted to, you could call it our humanness, quite honestly. Yeah. If that's the only thing you see that connects us, even that's a huge, huge connection to me. How did you discover witchcraft specifically? Where does witchcraft come into your eclectic path here? From Christian, Jewish church and temple, and is it because of the similarities to your indigenous background that made you interested and start learning more?
I think so. Like, I've always known, I've always just been like a hippie at heart. And I've always fallen back on that, but always kind of, like when I felt lost or not had the answers, or, would look for those answers, I would find myself coming across something like your podcast. And I feel like even when I would watch, like, it's so cliche and it's such a trend right now, but I was watching Hocus Pocus. I started watching that movie around the time I got kicked out of Christian school.
Okay.
So needless to say, or removed, basically. I don't know if I was really kicked out or if I was removed at the same time, but spent a lot of time by myself and started watching movies that were so taboo when I was younger. And one of them was Hocus Pocus. And I'm like, this is fucking funny. Like this is relatable. I have two sisters and this is how we treat each other. This is how we're going to treat each other when we're 300 years old. Like, and so I always and I'm very I'm an empath. I've always had this sense where I can look at somebody or talk to somebody and know, like, call them bullshit, or know when they're a good person or know when they're a bad person without hardly ever even talking. I can almost look at somebody and be like, no, nope, not going there. So I've always felt this kind of part of me, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if that comes from a traumatic childhood. I don't know if that comes from religious trauma, if that comes from generational trauma, if it comes from being Native American, or if it comes from my white side, or if I've just been chosen to be like this, to be like a bridge. And so, but I'd say mostly around that time that I watched Hocus Pocus when I was 14, or Harry Potter. I'm like, there's magic. Don't ever tell a child there isn't magic, because that's what I was told. Don't ever tell a child that magic is a bad thing, because then where's the sense there? It just takes away so much. It takes away hope. It takes away imagination. It takes away wonder. It takes away creativity. And I was told that there's no such thing as magic, and if there is magic, it's of the devil. And in, like a very religious. I'm not trying to dog on Christianity.
No, but that was your experience. Yep.
That was my experience with that church. And that mostly came from my dad, who I don't talk to. And so I got to an age where he was gone, and we were all out from under his thumb. And this part of me kind of started coming out more and more, realizing, that not everybody's like this. Yeah. Everybody has this, I would think, everybody has that sense of when you can tell a person's a good person or a bad person, or if they mean you harm or if they mean you good. Not everybody is like that. And so I'd say about my teenage years is when I sensed that I was different. Probably when my family went through its biggest dramas, when I was exposed to the most trauma, when I was exposed to the most anger, the most darkness. I knew that I was different. So I'd say about 14.
That's really common too.
Is it?
Yeah, that's really, really common. It kind of, so when our lizard brain gets activated, or that part of our brain that is as rudimentary as possible, right? That comes from our caveman part of us. This is technically up for debate, but I believe that everybody has the ability and the capacities to access their empathy and what you're describing. I believe, however, through significant continued abuse and trauma for thousands of years, particularly the last several hundred years, just to get very accurate, but at least the last 1,000 years, there have been a lot of forces at work here on this earth to damage that, and it's very successfully happened. And many, many people have had that ability of theirs completely suppressed, because if that's what was being beaten out of them, why they were being murdered, why their family was being taken away, you learn to suppress those parts that are putting you in danger. And again, this is where the act like whitewashing, where these things come from. And it's not just the white culture that has done this. It comes from a survival place. I want everyone to know that it's not okay to do that. I don't want to say it's okay to try and shove down somebody's culture and where they come from. But I do want to give people an understanding of where that comes from historically, is from a place of survival, so that your own family didn't get taken from you or killed or anywhere in between on that spectrum. And so later on, when that part of your brain, when that lizard brain is activated through trauma, it can actually also awaken those capabilities. And it can Because the truth is we're born with it for a reason. We're born with those empathic qualities for a reason. It's why, like, if you guys listen to when Ashley and I talk about this on Shadow Chats, it's why we say you are a soul in a human being's body. You know, you come here with, yes, these human being capabilities, but your soul qualities, traits, and capabilities, they come with you as well. Some people call that your aura. Some people call it your ethereal body. That's how I kind of see it. So when I talk about being an empath and I talk with other empaths, the way I interpret that now is that you can sense, you have those senses turned on much more than other people. And our ethereal bodies are always at least a few steps ahead of our physical bodies. And that's why if my ethereal body is also awake and aware, and then you approach me, our ethereal bodies meet first. And this is why you can sense right off the bat, this is an okay situation. This is an okay person. This is not. This is danger, or whatever that is. It's because our ethereal bodies, which is where part of where our higher selves live, they're always a few steps ahead of our human body. And I don't know how they're connected, because again, I'm no expert. I just study this stuff and write down my own experience. But from what I have gathered, our lizard brain, our survival is somehow connected to our soul body as well. And this is why trauma, near-death experiences, tragedy, all of these things, even though as humans we would call them quote unquote bad, why they can reactivate or waken our awareness to those capabilities that have actually been kind of suppressed and shoved down into us for a very, very, very long time. Did you, I would love to know specifically when it comes to Christian, Catholic, Jewish God, very monotheistic religions, right? One God. This is, again, your experience wasn't dogging on anything. I've read the Bible. It literally says these words. Those are just facts. But I would love to know, and I guess this is kind of a two-part question. Does spirituality and the way a person sees spirit or source or God, is that kind of universal among Native Americans, or is this specific to tribe and clan and culture? The way that spirit is seen and experienced. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So from what it sounds like, let me make sure I get this right. Do all tribes see like a creator kind of as one, kind of the same for all tribes?
Or what for all tribe? Is it, how does all or each tribe experience the concept of God? Is that is the concept of God,
I gotcha,
universal among tribes, or is this tribe to tribe depending on how their spiritual beliefs are passed down?
I don't know. I know I come from, I'm a Assiniboine, Gros and Crow, and those are all Plains tribes. Okay. They were all enemies at one point. But from what I know of that it is in a universal aspect. Yeah. And there was basically one source that we see that created everything.
Okay.
We think that that there was a main spirit that we called the creator, and that was what a lot of religions would see just as God. That did everything. But that being said, he had help. And we acknowledge those spirits as well. I know that the coyote is big in a lot of how the earth was created, or how the stars. There's a children's book I got from the Umatilla Reservation. It's called Coyote Hung the Stars. So he had his part in it. The coyote did. But then that's different from what my culture believes about coyote or coyote is like, we believe that a coyote is what walks you into your next life. He's your guide. He guides you into your next life. So it's so different tribe to tribe. But as far as the tribes that I'm from, we kind of see God as a more universal thing, as he's the one who he or she created all. So
thank you for answering that, because I think that this is, again, another opportunity for us to start deprogramming our education in our formidable years. If you're from mainstream culture and society, aka public education system, quite honestly, where, again, we were taught Native Americans, this one umbrella, this one group of people, they all believe the same. And we really have to start giving a shit about being accurate. We really have to start caring about saying, well, yes, on American soil, there were indigenous peoples already living here that have now been lumped into one label. But these were many groups and cultures of people with different sets of traditions, different sets of practices. And why I think it's so important that we talk about this, because this happens in witchcraft a lot, where people go, oh, you're a witch. And it's this all-encompassing term. Yeah. It's very hard for me to teach people this is a lifestyle. This is a practice and a lifestyle that can be layered with literally any other lifestyle and practice. Any of them. That's why there's Christian witches and Catholic witches and Jewish witches. It doesn't matter what your background is at all. It's a lifestyle. And technically the most accurate way to describe it is it's experiencing magic through ritual to me. So it's seeing the magic in every single thing that you do, that our existence as earth beings is in and of itself magical. Everything that we do, even the most mundane, has a divine purpose and is part of, I always go back to my episode I did with Leanne, if you guys remember, the multidimensional channeler, about the fabric that we're all a part of. They're all different parts of the fabric of source, but they are all each individually a divine piece of the interwoven fabric. So even myself, the further I go into witchcraft and spirituality, I have also tried to get more and more specific and research and learn about specific practices of parts of my lineage, my Northern Italian, my very prominent Euro-pagan background. It makes a lot of sense why I resonate with a lot of European pagan practices, because 90% of my lineage is from that one area of the world, quite honestly, from one spot. But the reason I asked about God and spirit is because where we saw historically the biggest clash of religions, I guess would be the best way to say it, is monotheism versus polytheism. One God, one source versus many. And it sounds like to me, and I'd love to hear from you, it sounds like to me, my understanding and my beliefs about deities, gods and goddesses, are very, very similar, mirrors, like you said, to the spirits that you were taught about, but under different names.
Yeah. So like in like Greek culture, there's a lot of gods and goddesses, and then they have a lot of different names from what I gather from it. We're listening to Greeking Out on Nat Geo, because I'm like, I don't have time to sit down and read, so I'll listen to it with my kids. So it's almost like there's a main god, and then there's branches off. It kind of branches off. And then those are gods and goddesses. And it kind of sounds like that. It's similar with Norse culture.
Yep.
And so, and with us, it's, I've never heard to those branches referred to as gods in the Native American culture. Like we have in from Fort Belknap, that's the reservation that I'm from. The one who helped God was Iktomi. It's either Iktom or Iktomi. There's that's a whole argument in my family. And even at that, not to digress too much, but even within each tribe, even within each language, there's different dialects.
Yep, I believe it.
So you throw that in with the everything else that branches off, then it gets messy. But anyways, I digress. But so like we've never referred to there is a group of Nakota people. I believe they're Canadians. That if somebody wants to leave in the comments and like refer me to the correct information on this. Basically, there's a group of there's a Canadian tribe, and they're called pagans. That is their name, or my mom calls them the pagans. And I'm wondering if they believe in multiple deities, as opposed to us. We mostly worship one, but we pay respect and tribute to multiple tiers.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that gives me a great question follow-up. How were you raised about life after death? What happens after you die according to your background and culture?
That's cool. I'm really glad that you talked about this because
this is my death witch coming out. See, I knew I would just ask good, curious questions while we were talking.
When I first started to listen to you about like all the different, I guess to go back on answer your question, I don't think I answered this earlier. When I really figured out that I'm witchy was when you started talking about the different types and you were talking about being a death witch. And that was really cool to hear about because that sounds scary. Like when you're new to all this, it sounds scary at first. But then when you talked into like going over shadow work and being a death witch, I'm like, well, you need that. Like you need somebody like that. There has to be balance. I feel like I'm more an eclectic witch for sure. For sure, I'm an eclectic witch. But anyway, so talking back into death, it's so sacred. Death is. So like we leave at dinners, we leave spirit plates out. We make the first plate that's made as a spirit plate. Essentially, it's an offering.
Every meal or special meals?
Special meals, holidays. We have sometimes we have multiple Thanksgivings a year, which that can sound really contradictory, but that's a whole nother thing.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So let me know if you want to know about that. But so we have a deep, great respect for our dead. So basically what happens, I'm branching off here. What happens when somebody dies? I'll use my grandmother, for example. You cry for 4 days. That's when you really cry hard. And like when we were at her wake, before her funeral, in the place that we had it at, we slept there. We slept in chairs. We slept on the floor. It was in a gymnasium. And we basically, once her body was ready, we stayed with her for 4 days. Well, I don't know if we stayed with her for 4 days, but she wasn't buried until the 4th day.
Okay.
Because we believe that when somebody passes, those 4 days, they say basically their goodbyes. They make their rounds, they make their peace, and that's where their coyote is leading them. They need a companion. Dogs are very highly respected in our culture. Canines are. So they make their rounds, and we believe, like we went to run to town during my grandma's funeral to go pick up food for a feed or something. And this like whirlwind came through town. There was a bunch of leaves. It was really windy. And my uncle just looks up and he goes, "That's mom right there." And then that was it. So we believe that during those 4 days, when they are making their rounds, sometimes they come back as an element. Yeah. So like there was maybe I should, I don't know this for sure, so I won't go there. But anyway, so as far as my culture and my family and my personal experience, when my grandmother passed away, you cry for 4 days, you bury them on the 4th. They need those 4 days to make their rounds goodbye. And then you mourn for a year. And you also are supposed to cut your hair.
A certain length or a certain amount, or
So
just cut?
I don't think it really matters, but you're supposed to do it with a knife. And I remember my aunt's, or I remember being at my aunt's house, and there was a bunch of women. I don't remember there being men. A lot of times when these ceremonies happen, I just remember seeing a lot of women, a lot of feminine energy. And I came out of one of the bedrooms at my aunt's, and it's just dark. The kitchen is just dark, and she's sitting on a chair, covering her face. And they had cut her braid she had a long braid, and that braid has been cut so many times. My aunt has witnessed so much death, but it was a big, long braid, and it was buried with my grandmother. So we normally only cut our hair when somebody dies.
Wow.
And with our newborns, when we have babies, we don't cut their hair till the first year.
Okay.
With my third baby, it was more like 3 years, just because I loved his hair so much. But death is a really magical, really sacred, really precious thing to us. And so my grandmother was buried, and then for a year, you basically cry for a year. You mourn for a year.
Okay.
But when that year is up, that's when you have to let them go. And I didn't know this till recently. My mom explained this to me, because I recently lost my father-in-law a little over a year ago. But my mom said, when the year is up, you need to make a step forward so his spirit can be at rest. And they're non-Indigenous. My husband's white, and those aren't their beliefs. But she's like, the relationship between you and him, that part needs to be put to rest. It's not dead per se, because I still have those memories, but he needs to rest.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have respect for that. And in some cultures and some tribes, they never used to say their name after they would die, or talk about them after the mourning process, just so that their spirit can rest.
So my question for this is, if you've heard me talk about the Death Witch thing, then you've heard me talk about our very toxic collective fear of death. At the very least in Western society is the main that I can actually speak to. And I believe that our fear of death accounts for vast majority, if not all of a lot of our wrongdoings to one another, human to human. And I think it's because we've gotten so far, so disconnected from death itself and what it is, its purpose, its role in this life, in this experience, in this universe. And one thing that I've learned about, at the very least, our ancient matriarchal societies is I don't think that we saw the same kind of fear that we have now, because so many matriarchal societies are very cyclical based, very, very concerned with circles, coming full circle, coming back around again. Mm-hmm. A lot of ancient European pagan graves were technically in mounds, like these man-made mounds. Mm-hmm. And they had these really tight tunnels that that was part of the respect, was getting down and having to crawl in to these graves. But from what we can tell, their corpses, or at least parts of them, were there. And you would crawl and you would be face to face with their dead body or dead body parts. And this was the new kind of relationship that you had with that spirit, though their physical body was gone, there was always this sense that they were still here in a different form, which again is why I believe ancient societies were more tapped into their empathy or their ethereal bodies, whatever you want to call it, why I think they could sense and feel the dead. I think they could sense and feel spiritual entities in general much, much more than we can now, because in modern society, especially post-scientific revolution, we are so concerned with, can you see it? Can you feel it? Can you hear it? And if you can't, it doesn't exist.
And the technicalities of it.
Right, exactly. And it's more than that. And this is why it's so hard for most of us to explain this. There is no language to explain a lot of these senses and a lot of these feelings, because these experiences haven't been valued for an extremely, extremely long time. And it's been chalked up to, this is woo-woo, and therefore it's nonsense, and therefore it's unimportant, quite honestly. When I love reminding clients, students, people I meet, I love reminding them, not only is it not nonsense, it is important, and it does matter, specifically because we all die. We all experience life, death, and rebirth in our life over and over and over again, whether it's a metaphorical death, whether it's people around us that we witness undergoing a physical death, whether we ourselves die. It is a part of our existence. Why would learning more about it and getting more comfortable with it and trying to connect with each other about those experiences, why would that be nonsense? Why would that make you a crazy person? That's something that doesn't make any sense to me, which is why I believe it comes back to people's fear of death. Yeah. Which is, if I speak it, if I say it, and this is where that fear of the devil comes in a lot. If I speak it, if I say it, I'm allowing it in. I'm welcoming it into my life. And something I've learned as being a death witch, and this might sound a little intense, but that's the point. I do welcome death into my life. I have learned over the last several years, since I really embraced that term for myself and embraced this path, that is the point, that we do walk hand in hand with death. You said that you watched Harry Potter. Do you know Harry Potter?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I haven't watched them all, but definitely the first three.
So in the very final book, in the Deathly Hallows, which is why I have the Deathly Hallows tattoo.
Oh, that's
because
cool.
of this story specifically. The story of the three brothers in Harry Potter is another archetypal story that you could probably find in many cultures throughout time. But the story is that there are three brothers. They go to cross a bridge one day and death greets them. It's time for them to die. And basically the brothers, and I'm super chopping this up, sorry everybody, don't kill me, Potterheads, but
don't worry, I'll watch it.
Yeah, but they kind of con their way out of it. They outsmart death. But death is always 3 steps ahead. So death's kind of letting them think that they're ahead and that they're getting away with it, when really death knows what's going on. So the first brother asks for the ability to never die, and he's granted the Elder Wand, which is the most powerful wand in the world. It can destroy anything. The second brother asks for the ability to cheat death and asks for the Resurrection Stone, which is the Philosopher's Stone. It's the ability to reawaken and reanimate the dead. The final brother asks for an invisibility cloak so that he may hide and be concealed from death. Well, the first brother, he, being the arrogant guy that he is, he goes out waving and bragging about his wand. And that night when he goes to sleep, another wizard kills him for the wand. Boom. Death gets his guy. So that guy thought he cheated death. No, death was already knew this was going to happen. Second guy, he uses the Philosopher's Stone to resurrect his long lost love. Well, it does this, but she, there are laws of nature to be taken into consideration. So when she's reanimated, it is not what he had hoped for, basically. And he ends up taking his life, realizing he'll never, ever be able to actually have her back again. He takes his life, boom, death comes again for the second brother. But the third brother really does evade death for years and years and years and years until he's finally ready and he takes off his cloak. I get goosebumps every time I tell this story.
Mm-hmm.
And he willingly goes peacefully hand in hand with death onward. And the whole point is that, number one, there is no cheating. We don't get out of it. It is a necessary part of life. And one of the biggest morals of this story shows me what happens when we do try to cheat, when we do try to avoid death, and why I do believe in my heart of hearts, why so many people in current modern society right now are feeling the call and their pull to their ancient lineage and roots and ancient cultures that they're part of. Because I really, really do believe that this linear way of thinking, that we're here one day and that we die and it's all over the next, I think that was manufactured only a few hundred years ago, and people have been living by that for a very long time. But I don't think that that's actually how it is, and why we're kind of naturally healing a lot of our fear around death by getting in touch with our spirituality again. Especially through healing our religious traumas and our religious roots. So that's why I wanted to ask you, if you feel like, especially in Indigenous and Native culture, do you think that there is more comfortability with death because of the practices around it?
I think so, because we have how much we acknowledge it, because of how faithful of a people we are,
Mm-hmm.
because of how much we've trusted, how much we've trusted what our medicine men have seen, how deeply we can see and feel things that others can't. And so, like, it's, for me, death isn't scary. Like when my father-in-law died, it wasn't, it's so final. It feels so final. And I don't know what his faiths were exactly, or what he believes in, or I know that he was a kind man. I know that he was kind, and I have the confidence and I have the faith in how good of a soul and how good of a spirit and how much virtue that man had, that I just have to trust that I have to trust my ancestors when they tell me that his ancestors know what they're doing. So I guess it was not so much a fear. I've never had a fear of where he would go, but I had a fear of the loneliness I would feel for him being gone.
This is very telling, because I think that you just made a big connection right then and there. I think a lot of us disguise it that way, or on the surface, that's what we say. Well, I'm lonely. I'm sad that they're not here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the true root of the fear is actually in the first thing that you said. I think people are scared of the unknown, and they have no idea what happens after this and where they're going to go. And there's a lot of trust and a lot of surrender that it requires.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
And in our culture, we still talk to them. That's why we put out a spirit plate.
Right.
Maybe we don't have a fear because when we feel them, we don't feel anything bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's my personal experience, and when it is, I very rarely I felt it, but when something bad, a bad spirit, something meaning no good has been here, I don't feel like it's been in a connection of the death of a loved one or anything like that. I feel like it's something that's just not welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I have enough faith in what I believe in and in my protection that I can just tell it to go away. And that's all we've ever been taught. That's all my mom ever says. My mom's like, if you get that bad feeling, just tell it to go away. And that's what I tell my kids.
God, that
if it's
resonates so much.
if it's not welcome, you have to say it though. You have to say
Yes, you do.
and you smudge. You burn some sweetgrass or some sage and you say you're not welcome here. And normally that's gone. But you have to have that faith. You have to have that trust. And I think that's the same thing that you need when somebody dies.
I agree.
And I've seen, and as weird as it sounds, I've seen a lot of beauty in death.
Doesn't sound weird to me at all. At all.
When my grandmother died, there was a woman that she sang in a Native American way, a song in another language. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And I can't tell you, I'll never hear that sound again.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never hear that sound again. And when my father-in-law died, I cried in such a way. It was like a wail, but it was like beautiful. I don't know how else to explain it. I think because of the gravity of our relationship. And grateful for what I had, and the pain that I had was real pain. I guess I don't know if that makes sense at all, but 100%. I feel like there is some beauty in it, and there is so much respect, and there's so much sacredness a part of it. And this isn't even stuff that you're told in Native American culture. When we go leave on Memorial Day, we leave plates of food on our loved ones' graves. We leave them there. A ceremony's done, and then those plates of food are handed out to other individuals. But when we leave, my mom always says, or my grandma says, we don't want to take anybody with you. So you need to rub sage on the bottom of your shoes, whether they're good, bad, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You need to let them rest. You need to leave them be. So there's a lot that is around death, a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of beautiful, a lot of ugly, when somebody's taken too soon. But it's pretty black and white, I feel like, when it comes to us with death, and in good ways.
Yeah. I like this because the other thing I'm hearing is, I think a lot of the reason is because you allow for so much of the grief process. And that is something we are very denied.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very denied. In my experience, I've experienced a lot of death in this life. And I feel like I'm only just now figuring out how to let grief in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that in my background, in my experience, we've been taught to shut that off because it doesn't feel good, because it's sad. And we wouldn't want to make anybody else feel sad. And we don't want to perpetuate that pain. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And you don't want to make anybody uncomfortable.
Exactly. And what ends up happening, because I love everything you said about the crying. From crying for 4 days to mourning for a year to the sound that your cry had after your father-in-law. What I hear when you talk about all that is allowing grief to come, allowing it to fully be here and around you and surround you. And like I said, it's only been in the last couple of years, in any of the deaths that I experienced in the last couple of years, that I've been even able to do that. And I don't know that I would have been able to do that had I not been embarking so consciously on this Death Witch journey. That now that's the only reason I know to let it fully come in and for lack of a better term, take over me, because it's a part of the process, and such a sacred and important part of the process at that. And I think that when we don't, I'm making a lot of connections for myself, and I hope a lot of other people as well. I think when we don't allow that grief to come all the way in, y'all, this is the poltergeist I'm talking about. These are the manifested spirits and entities that come from our suppressed emotions. And when you think about emotions, especially something so huge as grief, getting suppressed and oppressed, for decades and decades and hundreds of years. Can you imagine what that energy manifests itself into? Makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Well, you talked about, I think one of the first episodes when you were talking about being a death witch, I think it was during a full moon, there's a ritual, and I can't, you probably know what I'm talking about. And it's like basically a full moon ritual, and it's the death. If I'm not mixing up episodes here, listen to all of them. But like you're also, the bad stuff is dying. The bad stuff needs to die too. You know, we're so scared of death because of the good things dying. But we also, it's like cutting your hair. Your hair won't grow unless you cut the dead ends off.
And it's probably the Pluto episode.
Okay.
This is all Plutonian stuff you're talking about.
Okay. And so that was this, I think this is one of the episodes that prompted me to email you, because I recently learned from a TikToker, I don't remember her name, it was Tia Wood. She did a hair teaching episode, and she's like, we only cut our hair during death or a full moon. And see, I didn't know about the full moon thing. And I don't know if that is an Assiniboine thing, or if that's a Cree thing, or if multiple tribes do it. But she's like, we only cut our hair during morning or full moon. And it's like, that makes sense to me, why you would cut your hair on a full moon.
Same.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, because the full moon is associated with the release, which is why a full moon is both coming to fruition and death in a lot of ways. People don't like that part of it, though, because it freaks them out. It's the same thing as people getting afraid when they pull the death card in tarot. And I am not exempt from this. I have my own, which is why I try to be so transparent about it on the show. I have so much of my own fear of death that I'm working through. Yeah. So much. And that work that I'm doing is trying to reprogram what's been programmed in me for a long time. And again, when I talk about programming, I'm also insinuating the programming that's been done long before Dani in this life was born. You know, that generation, that those go back. I want to transition a little bit because you brought up sage and sweetgrass, and I have so many good questions to ask you. So, as a death witch, one of the most common scenarios people email me with for help on are sticky spirits, is what I like to call them. You know, it's just so common. People, my friend, they went to this place, they were messing with this thing, and now there's a spirit attached to them. What do we do? I get this question all the time, which is why I resonated so strongly when you said that your mom taught you just have to tell it to go away. I think every culture has their own phrasing. I think every tradition has their own like tools that they might use for this. But no matter where you look, every single culture eventually will tell you, oh, well, you ultimately have the autonomy. You ultimately get to tell this thing, yes, you can stay, I invite you in, or no, you need to go away. There are ways to invite things in without saying those exact words, by the way, number one. And saying, just so you know, I'm not trying to freak anybody out, but saying, I have this thing attached to me and I can't get rid of it, that's one of those ways. That's one of the ways that you're inviting something and giving it permission, because you're saying those you're saying those words. You're saying you have no power over it.
You're feeding it.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Which is why the more and more work I do in learning about mediums, psychic, spirit talkers, you know, it could be just straight up people that have experiences with ghosts. I mean, I try to learn about all these in so many different avenues. But at the end of it, it always does come back to, but seriously, if you mean it, if you believe it, and you tell this thing to go away, that's literally all that's required of it. Well, hearing you throughout our episode so far talk about sweetgrass and talk about sage, here's my next question for you, because this has come up quite frequently for me in people asking me these for advice in these scenarios. People say, well, I saged and saged and saged, and it still won't go away. I saged and saged and saged, and it still won't go away. So here's my question. Number one, what I've told a lot of people, and if I'm totally wrong and off base in this, I'm dead serious. Please be honest with me and tell me. But what I've told a lot of people is, I think a lot of the reason why this saging and saging and saging is not working is because, first of all, you have no idea what this entity or spirit is or where it's coming from, but you are sensing it and you're just whipping out the sage instantaneously. Number two, you're not taking into consideration where you are currently living. And I think that there are a lot of people that use specifically sage because of how much it is blown up in the spiritual industry, popularity-wise. I think there are so many people misusing it. And this is ultimately why it's not working, if you will. Will you tell me how you were raised with sage? Is this something, is it used at specific times, specific scenarios? What is your opinion about it being an open versus closed practice, the usage of sage? And is using sage, just burning it and using it in your culture, is that considered the exact same thing as smudging, or is smudging technically a different way to use sage, if that makes sense?
Yes, that all makes perfect sense.
Okay.
So first of all, don't buy sage and don't sell it. If it is not gifted to you and it's not accessible to you, not you personally, but to anybody listening, it probably wasn't meant for you. It's not really meant to be farmed, and it's not really meant to be, it's just not really meant to be farmed. And if it's wrapped in it's a prayer, it's a tool for prayer. It's not meant to look like pretty and to put pretty flowers and to put pretty crystals in it. And it's not meant to be picked up off of a boutique shelf over somebody who owns the boutique and who has a lot of money and knows nothing about the practice of it. So much has already been taken from Indigenous people and saying that we can't do these things, for a new generation to come in and be like, oh, Indigenous people have been doing this for years. Let's do it. Let's make it look pretty. Let's sell it. And then let's post it to Instagram. That's opening up a whole can of bad worm, or a whole can of worms, because that was taken from us. And now you're appropriating it to make your Instagram look pretty, or to make your shop look eclectic. And so,
or to just feel safe. I notice a lot of people just buy it as a safety net. And again, that in and of itself is telling me you don't believe you have the power. You're putting all of the power in the sage. You're not actually having autonomy over your energy.
Right. And the correct way to use it, so it's just not to buy it. And you just burn it. If you feel yucky, you just light it and burn it in a safe way. My mom told me to take it, and see, I had been doing it wrong. I kept mine on the stems, and my mom's like, you're going to get like a burnt smell. Take it off of the stems and just burn the leaves. So I'm like, oh, okay. So even like I was doing it wrong. Another way I like to use it is I have a coffee can on top of my wood stove filled with water, and I'll just throw sage leaves in the water just randomly, just to smell good. Or if we're feeling yucky, or if there's a bad feeling, or if I think there's a bad spirit looking at us or something like that. And you just, if it has to do with a bad feeling, just burn your sage and tell whatever negativity it is that you're not welcome here. And normally that works for me. That's really what works for me. But another thing too is, if you've gone somewhere, you've been exposed to something yucky. The best way I can explain it is yucky. You've been in somebody's house and you got a bad vibe. Rub sage on the bottoms of your feet and on the bottoms of your shoes. or sprinkle the leaves in your, when I used to fight fire for a living. And one of the first times I went out on an assignment, my mom sent a package of, I think it was sweetgrass. And you can do this with sweetgrass too. She said, just put it in the bottom of your boots. And I stayed safe. I stayed fine. And I was in like one really sketchy scenario while fighting fire. But throughout my entire fire career, my boots, and plus I live in Oregon, there's sage everywhere. So I'm bound to walk through it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always safe. I was always safe. So that's the best way to do it, is just keep it simple. You don't have to take pictures of it, or, you know, as long as there's good intentions behind it, good positive intentions, that's probably the safest way to use it. And it's fine to pick it. It's fine to keep it in your house. But I even myself have taken pictures of sweetgrass like burning because it looked cool and I wanted to put it on my Facebook profile or add it as a background banner. But I'm like, this is meant for prayer. This is a sacred thing that has been here for a long time, and I really want to respect it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take a picture of it, and I'm not going to post it because it's trendy. And I've been doing it. Yeah. My family's been doing it for generations. It's like, no, I just have to have that faith, because that just adds something negative to it.
Yep. This is why when I talk about taking pictures of your spells, your altar, your book of shadows, any of those things. This is why it's not such a black and white answer like, yes, you should always post them. No, you never should. Mm-hmm. The intention behind it matters. The way I've always explained it is, just like you said, like I've also gone through my experience where I was hopping on trends. I thought it looked cool and I wanted to post it and show it to people or whatever. And while those aren't necessarily malicious intentions, they are a little vain, and they're very shallow, and they're just not very deep. And so where I've shifted is, if I ever post a picture of any kind of magic or ritual work that I'm doing, I'm posting it with the sacred intention of education. I want people to see this because it usually comes with some form of like instructions. There's something educational to it where I'm like, I'm utilizing this platform that I have to reach many, many people and teach them how to use this. And that is much more aligned with what I feel is my purpose, my soul purpose in this life, versus a lot of people will praise me for it and it will feel good, which is a lot of what we do on social media.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Will you tell us the difference in sage and sweetgrass and the difference in their uses?
So they're the same thing, smudging. Okay. Sweetgrass is just, I don't think it's native to Oregon. It is to northeastern Montana, where I'm from. So I actually have 2 planters of it. It's a really resilient grass. You let it go to seed and it comes back like tenfold. It's really cool. It reminds me a lot of our people.
I love that.
But so it's long. I have one right here. Actually, I'll grab real quick just so I can show you. And I'm not sure if you've seen them. So just as an example. So like it's braided, it's supposed to be kind of like our hair. Mm-hmm. It's braided, and we let it dry out. And then normally you put it on top of a piece of hot coal and it kind of burns like incense. And you just use it for prayer. And the smoke with sweetgrass takes your prayers up to the Creator. And a lot of times Indigenous people use an eagle feather for that smoke, because an eagle, we believe, is so sacred because he could get the closest, or he or she could get the closest to God. So that's the symbol of the eagle feather when praying and sending the smoke up. Kind of like what you were talking about with like when you burn like bay leaves, or when you burn rosemary, anything like that. It's taking your thoughts, your vibes, your prayers, whatever you want to call it, and sending them to where they need to go. And so sweetgrass is kind of more meant for prayer, I would say. And then sage is kind of more meant for like cleansing.
Okay.
So using kind of the same way, but a little bit different.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you remember the episode I talked about this on,
Mm-hmm.
would you say that the way that I have defined smoke cleansing and smudging to be accurate? Meaning, in my research, the use of smoke, the use of burning dried plants or herbs for their sacred smoke, I can find this in all kinds of cultures throughout time. That is something I can find everywhere. I use the umbrella term for that as smoke cleansing. Will you tell us what smudging is and the difference here and why this difference matters?
I don't think there really is too much of a difference other than the fact that smudging is, it's just the term used for Indigenous people.
Okay.
And I don't want to put that like wall up per se.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to make it sound like this is smudging and this is smoke cleansing. I think that they're both, it sounds like they're both the same, honestly. And it's just so much that I feel like the term smudging came from the Indigenous part of it. But I feel like they're the same thing. Really.
The practices themselves and the intentions are the same behind it. So I agree with that. I very much agree with that. And a lot of the reasons why I talk about why it's so important to use specific terminology is so that we're not doing the same harm that has been done for so long, and we're not just appropriating a term without understanding where it comes from and who it comes from. That's a really, really big part for me as I started, especially when I first started studying and learning about witchcraft. You have to understand, everybody, that, again, this practice, witchcraft, it branches. Umbrellas everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So
that's what led me here. Because I was
exactly.
Like, it's medicine. It's magic. It's the same thing, just maybe altered a little bit depending on demographic.
Right. Where harm can come from and where damage can take place is when we kind of mindlessly adopt any kind of practices or any kind of terminology, in my opinion. It's the mindless part of it. So that it's kind of like the Instagram picture we were talking about, where you're just doing it because it feels good and it looks nice right then and there. It's very shallow and there's not really any actual intention to it. And so when it comes to the term smudging, do you think that it's harmful for people who are not Indigenous to use that term? Or do you think that it matters where they're coming from and the context behind it, I guess?
I think as long as it's coming from a good place and as long as the context is positive and it's not taking away, it's not belittling the culture, not belittling how deeply rooted it is, then I think it's fine. I think that's that's what my whole goal and what I'm doing and what I'm striving for is bridging that gap. So saying, only Native Americans can call it smudging or only Native Americans can smudge, we're just creating a wall and we're just making less understanding and creating more ignorance. But I think as long as it's done with good intention and as long as people are asking the right questions or maybe stating, maybe if I'm doing this wrong, can somebody show me the right way?
Yeah.
As long as it comes from a good place and not a place of vanity, then I think it's fine. I don't think it should be either or. I think it's fine just as long as it's as good as you're doing good.
There is a way to take things literally, and make them sound like they were your own. And that is what is disrespectful and damaging to me, is when you see something that you just think is cool, and you take it on and you're like, here's this thing that I do, everybody. And I think one of the ways that you actually bring light to history and bridge these gaps is by saying, this is where I learned about it. This is what I learned about it.
Yeah.
And this is why it resonates with me so much. I think this is such a beautiful practice. And now this is why I do it. That is so different to me than, I see some of these, like, I've even been invited to like baby showers or wedding showers where, they're hosted by, I'm just going to call it what it is. They're hosted by kind of more of a hippie or granola crowd that are very fascinated by, or they do really resonate with Indigenous practices, but there is no giving any kind of credit to that. And they're just like, oh, I really like that. So we're going to do that ceremony for this baby shower. Oh, I really like that. So we're going to do that ceremony too for this wedding shower. And we're just going to do it. Isn't this such a cool, this happens with cacao ceremonies a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And that's such a sacred practice and ceremony that no, I don't think, again, I'm not the expert here, so no one quote me or at me about this. But my point is that I don't necessarily think that's meant to be a totally closed practice, but to take it and say, oh, isn't this just this cool thing that we're doing? This is what we're all doing. Cool. Feel the magic. Okay, bye, everybody. That is doing further damage because that's keeping that wall there that you said. I really like that you said that. It keeps that wall there. And by talking about it and being just honest and open and transparent and saying, like, I learned about this. I was trying to learn about other ways that we could celebrate this big, beautiful rite of passage. And I learned about this from this culture. And I think it's beautiful. And I'd like to share it with all of you here today. That's so much different than just.
And that's it right there.
Yeah. Exactly. This is a perfect time to ask you kind of my final question for you here. Moving forward, I think, I'm hopeful at least, but I do think that we are starting to educate ourselves better. I do think more and more is coming to light. I do think people give a shit more, maybe than ever, possibly, at least in our modern society. At least in the last few hundred years, people really are caring more and more and more. And we're wanting to bridge these gaps. We're wanting progress. We're wanting to move forward. We're wanting to heal. We're wanting to offer reparations. We hear these terms a lot, though. Heal those generationals, offer reparations. But what are the action steps? How do we do this is probably the hardest part. And that's the part we're really trying to bridge right now.
Yes.
For you, Joni, I think in a lot of ways, especially after talking to you today, I do agree with you. I believe that you chose in this life to be a bridge in many forms, in many different ways. So when you think about that, and you're raised on the reservation in your Indigenous culture and background, you were raised, I mean, those are just as formidable years to start around 7 or 8 into the church. I mean, that's just as young. And to experience that version of religion, becoming an adult and learning about paganism and witchcraft and how this all kind of connects in together. For you personally, what does our kind of ideal future look like? Because I agree that a lot of people want to do good and inadvertently keep the wall up because they're afraid of stepping on toes, offending people, hurting people. And I think that they don't realize, while trying to avoid hurting somebody, they're keeping the divide line there. So what does the future of these gaps getting bridged ideally look like, in your opinion?
I think what it looks like is it's going to have to come from the younger generations, just being open and being taught. And I'm actually working on a workshop that I want to do here in Central Oregon, basically doing just that, exactly what you're talking about. And it's going to take people asking questions, and it's going to take people being willing to answer those questions. And it's going to take Indigenous people to be open to that. Because I've came across Indigenous accounts, and I get why we're closed off. It's the generational trauma thing. And I get why we don't want to be stepped on, but I'm tired of being scared. Like, if somebody's going to say something or somebody's going to turn around, then they're going to do it either way, whether we try to help, bridge that gap or not. And what that's going to take is both sides being open, both sides willing to learn from each other, and both sides willing to teach each other. And I heard somebody talk about Indigenous culture, and they're like, it's not my job to educate you. And it's like, maybe it's not yours, but I'll make it mine. People, I teach a bead class, and people are always wanting to know the history behind certain patterns and certain methods. And I'm willing to teach them. And that's what they come to learn, is not just about what they're making, but about the people who started this craft. But like I said, it's going to take both. It's going to take both to be open-minded, and both to be willing to do the work, and to teach the younger ones, because they're the sacred ones. They're the ones that are going to keep it going, because eventually our bloodline will be depleted. Eventually there will be no more blood quantum, but those traditions can still stay alive.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to have to be.
That almost made me a little emotional when you said that, because I agree. No, it's not any one person's job or responsibility, especially to educate the masses. I agree with that. And I agree with you that it still gets us into a rock and a hard place, in between a rock and a hard place, where obviously our education system is failing us. We cannot rely on our education system to take that responsibility. And I know this is a hard truth for a lot of people, because I wish it too. That would be great. I would love it. I would love it if our education system actually honored true history.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It just doesn't. And it is going to take more than one person, but many people, I agree with you, on both sides, saying, but I'm willing to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm willing to ask the hard questions, because I'm ready to hear the hard answers. And I think that is one of the hardest parts that holds people back a lot, is it's having these conversations. It means we're going to have to, kind of like we were talking about the death stuff. Yeah, we'll get to talk about the fun stuff, but the ugly stuff too has to come up. That's part of the journey. It's part of the whole deal. And I think that this is where a lot of people, this has definitely happened to me in my experience, where you're ready, you feel yourself physically and energetically in this place to do some healing, to take steps forward into progress. And we don't know what that looks like in real life, if you will. So my last question for you is, and not to put this responsibility on you at all, but to ask your opinion. What do you think is a good way for people to start educating themselves? How can people start to expose themselves more? How can people start to tear down this wall on both sides, so that we can start meeting in the middle and having these conversations?
Don't do what I did when I wrote this email. Don't be scared to get a no answer, because there aren't always going to be answers to the questions, and you're not going to be able to experience all of it, any of us, in anything. So don't be afraid to go to that powwow. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to take the bead class or to approach an Indigenous person. If you get told no, you get told no. Then that person missed out on an opportunity to teach you something cool. But if you get the vibe that somebody is willing to answer your questions about their beaded hat or the moccasins they're wearing, then ask them. And hopefully they are open enough to tell you. Yeah, that's all that's going to be. It's just going to have to start with snowballs, just little snowflakes turning into snowballs.
That was such a cardinal answer to give. It's not just a cardinal answer. That was such a Venus-ruled answer. It makes so much sense to me why Libra is your rising sign and Venus is your chart ruler in this life. You do bridge a lot of gaps because connection, the theme, the big overarching theme of connection is a very prominent theme for you in this life. So when things are disconnected, it doesn't feel right. And it's supposed to not feel right to you, Joni. And you're supposed to sense and snuff those things out and find where the connection can happen. And you're totally doing that. It's really cool.
Yeah, I feel like I feel at home in myself since I started listening to you and Ashley. I'm like, these guys would be so fucking cool to hang out with in real life. But I feel like I don't know how else to explain it at home in myself. And it's just, I don't know what came down or what got added, but it's good.
That's such a fulfilling thing to hear. So thank you for saying that. That's really, really amazing. And exactly what I know she and I both intend when we share our messages. So thank you. And thank you again for reaching out, because you're exactly right. That really actually is where everything starts. And we do learn this from the cardinal signs. Nothing can change. Nothing can happen until someone makes that choice and someone makes that first step. And quite frankly, takes the risk that you're talking about. Yeah. You're right that there's risk in it, and it doesn't always matter. And even if that person says no, one thing that I really love, I think Ashley did say this. I'm pretty sure it was Ash who said this to me most recently. Rejection is protection. That person was not meant to be your guide at this time.
That's a good saying. Okay. I like that. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, I love that one a lot, because that person probably couldn't have given you the answer in a way that would have resonated with you anyways. But I love what Joni is saying with all of you, that doesn't mean give up and stop there. Then that person, that was the missed opportunity in that particular scenario. And that doesn't mean you stop on your journey toward bridging these gaps. I know how many people are listening to this that, whether you are from an Indigenous background or not, many, many, many people were born and chose the purpose in this life of bridging the different gaps and formulating connections that have been disconnected. And this is exactly how you go about rectifying that, is by embarking on that. So thank you for being such a pure and wonderful example of that for all of us, Joni.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited that I got to share all this with you.
Me too. This was really, really, really exciting. And if you ever want, I would love to have you on again and quiz you about all of these amazing practices that I was like, oh, I could ask about that. Oh, I could ask about that. Because it's just so interesting to hear.
It's tough to narrow it down. Well, yeah, reach out to me anytime.
I absolutely will. Thank you so much. If you would like to connect with anybody, can you tell us where we could find you and follow you and connect with you and support you online or on social media?
Yeah. So if you just want to shoot me an email, it's eveningironbeadwork@gmail.com. And then I also will be posting information about my workshops. It'll be a Native American appreciation versus appropriation class. So I will post details. I don't have the space reserved for that yet, but I'm definitely going to be doing those workshops for however long I can do them for. But that will be available on my Squarespace, and that is eveningiron.squarespace.com. And then I'll send that information over to you, Dani, so that you can post it if you're willing to do that. That'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Oh, I definitely will. I'd love to share that for you. Thank you. Thank you so much again. I had such a great conversation with you, Joni.
Me too, Dani. Thank you.
Of course. Everybody, thank you so much for your time today and every day. Please, if you had questions that came up during this episode, don't hesitate to reach out to Joni via email or me, because I would love to have an excuse to have another conversation with Joni. So please let us know. Yes, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Make sure you have fun, have a great rest of your week, and stay magical out there. so much for listening. If you enjoyed That Witch podcast today, I would be super, super grateful if you would take a moment to head over to Apple or Spotify and leave a rating and review. It really helps to support the show. Or if you just have a friend that you think would enjoy what we're doing, what we're talking about here, you can just share the show with them as well. Now, if you yourself like what you're doing here and you want to get more into the magic of the neighborhood, I highly recommend checking out my monthly membership, That Witch School. It's kind of like a witchier, more interactive style of Patreon subscription where you can enroll at a tier level that fits your lifestyle and budget. You can get instant access to all of the bonus content that we've already done, as well as all of the future amazing to come bonus content that we'll be doing in the future together. There's exercises for strengthening your intuition. There are loads of resources for studying astrology and learning your birth chart. We've got guest workshops, bonus episodes, exclusive discounts, and so much more. My full-time students also get exclusive access to Mighty Networks, our private online community platform, which is basically like a way better and way more magical social media platform with a bunch of really cool people like you that just want to learn from and support one another on this witchy spiritual journey. If this sounds like something that you would really enjoy, head over to thatwitchnextdoor.com/enroll and explore the tier level of That Witch School that would fit you today. Now, if you have any questions after the episode today, any inquiries, show suggestions, anything you'd like to share with me, you can head over to thatwitchnextdoor.com/conjurethatwitch. Remember, I'm just always right next door. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next episode.